Charlottesville, Virginia, to talk with U.S. Army generals about sustainability and about the ecological footprint. They think they have discovered that there's a relationship between environmental quality and conflict. Now, here's an interesting story. I'll just sort of divert here. Under the Bill Clinton administration, there was a lot of money that got sent to the Pentagon for purposes of trying to make this correlation between environmental quality, social well-being, and conflict. And the Pentagon responded very well because they saw this as an opportunity for actual peacekeeping activity, peacekeeping mission, as opposed to some of the other missions that they've been sent on. In the 8 years after the Clinton administration, no monies flowed to these questions and to these topics. And so we found ourselves on hold. The whole sustainability conversation stopped, dead in its tracks, for 8 years. Now, under Obama, the gates have opened up again, and so the Global Footprint Network gets to send someone to Charlottesville, West Virginia for 2 or 3 days to talk with them about the importance of metrics for managing or avoiding conflict between nations. And so they're looking to find a formula. You know, this is the way that they would approach a problem like this. They want a metric and a formula that they can use to calculate the risk of instability from one government to another. And so I get to go and tell them that it's a different story, ladies and gentlemen, that the story is not about single nations, it's not about individual nations, it's about regions of the world and the interdependence of nations on biocapacity. And that's going to be an interesting discussion. They're looking at our measures and our metrics with the idea that we might be able to actually help them develop a new one. And I think that's possible. But we'll see. I don't know if you guys can see this or not. We'll wait for the projector here to catch up with us. Here's another graphic that compares demand for biocapacity with with the potential to produce biocapacity nation to nation. Here's the 2.1 average. Here's the demand, the 2.7 average demand that we see. And now our projector here will catch up with us. And you have an opportunity to look and compare from a few nations' standpoint how these nations, how their internal production differs from their demand for biocapacity. And yes, there was a question.
Yes, I wanted to get this right. The risk of, that during the Clinton administration, the money went into studying, and they wanted to create a metric formula to look at the risk of lack of biocapacity in nations and how that affected their quality. I missed that correlation.
They weren't so specific at that time because actually biocapacity hadn't come on the radar. They were asking about environmental quality. Yeah, and so here's an interesting little tidbit while we're back on the subject, waiting for the projector here. This will be an interesting discussion, I suspect. Of all of the environmental quality metrics that you can think of, which one would you think arise as the strongest correlation between environmental quality and conflict? Now you might say water availability, right? You might think in those terms. That wasn't it. What else comes to mind? A correlation, and not cause and effect, because we don't know that. We can't prove it. We can only show statistically the correlation. But there's one measure out there of regional discomfort, to use the word incorrectly probably. It's childhood mortality. Childhood mortality correlates to conflict more directly than any other measure of environmental and social quality. And I think that's very interesting. So, of course, the question becomes, well, where does this childhood mortality come from? You know, it's a silly question, of course, but it all tracks back to environmental quality. It all tracks back to social equity and justice. It all tracks back to all of the variables that go to make up quality of life. And so these kinds of things become very interesting points of conversation for the U.S. military. I think it's fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to having this experience. Yes?
Sorry, but in places of poverty, there's a lot more babies born.
Yes.
So how does that balance out with the mortality of them?
Well,
I'm Maybe I've missed something.
In areas where there isn't much biocapacity and lots of babies are born, there's a higher mortality, right?
Right.
And in those same regions, it turns out there are opportunities for conflict. That's the correlation that we're seeing.
Okay.
There were some interesting graphs in one of the reports into it, but
Say again, please.
there were some graphics in the BBF report, I think, about the mortality and
Yep.
how it relates to poor countries versus richer countries.
Exactly.
It's quite shocking.
Thanks for saying that again. Point being that there's a whole literature out there about these topics that I was unaware of until I had to prepare for this discussion that's coming up in a couple of weeks. There's not just a literature, it's an intricate language, actually. Let me give you an example. Who can tell me what a large power projection platform is? A large power projection platform. This is Army speak.
TV.
A large power projection platform is a military base. That's creepy. Yeah.
Power projection.
A large power projection platform is a military base. So I have to learn a new language in order to communicate with these people in ways that, so they'll hear me. And so I'm spending a lot of time reading this literature and trying to become conversant. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting discussion. All right. Thanks for asking that question. So, because I like talking about these real-world experiences, and I think it maybe gives you a flavor for what's going on out there and how pervasive this discussion of sustainability has become. Interestingly, the consultant who is providing support to the U.S. Army on this has already communicated with the Marines. And they are of the opinion that eventually this methodology we're intending on develop will trickle down all the way to the Coast Guard. And beyond that, they have the goals for NATO and other regions of the world where military structures deserve to know or have access to the same knowledge. So I think this is really very interesting. Yes?
The great thing about working with the military on this kind of thing strikes me is they just have such a capacity to collect data and provide information that can only help the work of Global Footprint Network and the community of scientists self-contributing. So, they have so much data and have the capacity to get more data
And I think your point
on
is,
a large level. So it's exciting that they want to work.
they can influence governments
Yeah.
in ways that you or I, and the Global Footprint Network, this nonprofit, might never have the opportunity.
I wonder what that really means.
Yeah, it's a good question.
How are they going to use the data?
It's a good question.
It's
Yeah,
military is still the military.
Exactly. And so part of my message to them is going to be that sense of distrust and concern. Inside me and inside, let's call it non-compatibles. Yeah, there is that. So there needs to be a great deal more sensitivity to these kinds of issues from inside the institutions. And interestingly, I'm working with people that, are very easy to work with. They're wonderful people. We're going to develop friendships out of this, I know. And so that's encouraging to me to some degree. I think the real question becomes now, can this way of thinking make its way into, the basic dynamic of military government interactions? That's the thing.
But, the thinking, it seems that it would automatically be used in a way that's unsustainable because their mission is not to take care of. It's...
Let me offer that their mission has not been to take care of. You see, and that's the thing. Can we shift the mission away from? Can we shift the mission away from engaging conflict and encouraging conflict to one of peacekeeping? And because they understand that the issues are so significant that global instability might arise unless all institutions are brought to bear on these questions. So, okay, just to continue, if we all live like residents of the U.S., how many planets would we need? We'd need this many planets, basically 4.5 planets. We don't have 4.5 planets, so I'm sorry, not everyone on the planet can live like we do here in the U.S., nor can we live like they do in France. 2.5 planets worth of biocapacity demand. How about 10?